Hey, welcome everyone, and great to see you all on the stream. My name is Thomas Maurer. I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft, and today we have a very special guest on our stream, Lior Kamrat. Lior, how are you doing today? Did you get any sleep?
Not so much. 3-4 hours, something like that.
Yeah, crazy days, right? Like really crazy. For those who probably haven't really known what's going on, yesterday, Microsoft Ignite started as a virtual event, and that is where we as Microsoft like to obviously introduce and announce a lot of new updates, features, and products. And in this stream today, I'm joined by Lior, and we will obviously go through and try to cover all of these as good as we can over the next couple of minutes.
As good as we can.
There were quite a few, right? That's for sure. Before I actually go into this, I just want to quickly highlight to everyone, this should be very interactive. We are totally prepared, obviously, for this show, but we want you to add your questions and comments into the chat. I saw already a couple of people like Andrew, Chris, Heiko from Germany. I'm happy to see you all in the chat, and I'm sure there are many others as well. So feel free to ask your questions, comments on things. We are super happy, and again, we try to answer everything we can. So with that, Lior, before we actually dive into like what's new in Ignite, you just recently changed your job role to something I find very exciting. So what are you doing? What is your role?
Yeah, I also changed my haircut, by the way. So recently I joined our customer success unit and to a team that is what we call solution engineering, and just kind of to explain the viewers what does that really mean. So every time you're going into the cloud adoption framework or enterprise scale landing zones, and you're going to try to find how to build things in an enterprise fashion or best practices around different services, these entire stuff are coming from the customer success solution engineering team. Obviously, it's a collaboration between a lot of people and a lot of groups inside Microsoft. And as part of this role, I took the role of the worldwide technical strategy lead for Hybrid All Up. What that means is that I'm basically responsible for making our field awesome. That's how I like to look at this. And the way to do this is via creating a lot of technical content, advocate for the things that we are working on, doing this type of stuff with you, Thomas. And and also working very closely with the product group. So that's the new role and the new haircut. So
yeah, awesome. Yeah, I already congratulated you at the new haircut. Looks very fancy and much more serious than before. So,
right.
So let's turn to Ignite and like a little bit of what is going on. You also mentioned, by the way, that you would bring cookies to the session as well. By the way, I will hold you accountable for that at the end. But give us a little bit of a introduction on on Azure Hybrid.
Yeah, this thing, hybrid, like in the context of Azure Arc, Azure Stack HCI, all this stuff kind of started to explode 2 years ago, but I think that now we are getting into a point that things are becoming more streamlined. And the way I like to look at this is that we were kind of like, it was a three phases of how hybrid looked like. We started with connectivity, which is, if you're site-to-site VPNing into your environment or express routing into your environment, that means that you're hybrid. Today, we all know that's not really the case. Then we came up with Azure Stack family, which was, the first canary towards that direction. Somewhere in between, we also started working on the VMware stuff, which was also kind of, hybrid-ish. But now with the notion of Azure Arc and Azure Stack HCI, I think that this is where hybrid is really coming to life. And the reason that I'm saying this is because all of the solutions that are now available and the things that are coming are software-based or control plane-based. So that's why I think that hybrid now is becoming a bit more real. And we'll talk about the announcements, and we can see the direction that we're taking with this. So
Absolutely. No, again, I love the Arc part. Obviously, if people not know about Azure Arc, it really allows us to actually do like two major things. If you look at it at a very, very high level, it's actually bringing the Azure management, the Azure control plane, and let us add infrastructure and services and applications which are running outside of Azure to that control plane. And the other thing, actually bringing Azure services which are running in Azure outside of Azure. So people who probably cannot deploy something in the Azure region, they need to, like for data sovereignty reasons or networking latency reasons and many others, that they can deploy it in their own data center. Yep. Now, starting with that, let's dive into the news. And one of the Arc services which got updated quite drastically and got a lot of new capabilities is the Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes. Mm-hmm. Can you probably like tell us a few sentences like what that is and like what's new?
So if you're following the Arc space, Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes is really the fundamental building block for all the other stuff. And I'm also sharing my screen here to kind of show with the blog post that Purnima wrote around the Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes stuff, so you can go and check it out. But the notion of Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes as a fundamental building block for everything that is Azure Arc enabled services is critical to understand, because the way that we are thinking about this when we are building this type of services is really taking advantage of the Kubernetes agility form factor and the scalability and everything, all the bells and whistles that comes with it. So as part of Ignite, what we basically iterated on or reshared with the audience is this entire notion of Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes, but also making sure people now understand that extensions are generally available. And extensions are very important because extensions are, and I'm just gonna show this here. Extensions are the way for us to extend that Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes resource, right? The name says it all. And the way that we are doing this is by injecting basically custom resource definitions and agents and Kubernetes primitives and resources into these Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes clusters. And by doing so, we are able to open set of capabilities that are mapped to those type of extensions, right? So things like Azure Defender or how we, now it's, I think we changed the name, right, Thomas, for Defender?
Many times.
Many times, right. So Azure Defender and Azure Monitor, or more specifically Container Insights, right, via Azure Monitor for Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes is now GA. That gives you the really the ability to start looking at your cluster as with Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes, it's a first-class citizen inside the platform, but extensions really opens the door to start working with our own services on top of that cluster, right? So Azure Monitor, Defender, data services, which we're going to talk about more later on. It's also enabled via this app services, right? Event grid, functions, web apps. All these stuffs are part of this extension model, and this is something that we're working on. Another thing that we highlighted at Ignite is Cluster Connect, and Cluster Connect is really an interesting one because if you're thinking about Kubernetes in the notion of security, a lot of the time you're thinking, okay, so I need access to the API server. That's how I do all the stuff that I do. But with Cluster Connect, we are flipping the table in the way that we are doing this, right? So instead of you as the cluster admin or as a developer that wants to develop against that cluster and needs access via your station or even via your CI/CD pipeline, instead of having direct access to that cluster, now the cluster will initiate the outbound connectivity to the control plane, which is Azure Arc, right? And that's obviously more secure. And that also allows us to basically flush all these resources like namespaces, monitoring, all that stuff. So yeah, a lot of cool stuff,
I think this is like the Cluster Connect one is like especially handy if you look at today's environment, right? Where we all speak not just about hybrid cloud, but we also speak about hybrid work. So like we as like IT pros and developers, we're probably working from home, right? And we don't probably have access to the data center where our Kubernetes cluster is running or the other cloud provider.
In the before time. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, what do we do, right? And with this, actually, we can actually get easy access and not just easy, but also obviously I need to stress this enough, and you said this, secure access to these clusters, and are able to manage these without having a complex VPN setup and networking strategy to enable every developer from home to do so, right?
And I think it's important. And the last thing, Thomas, that I will mention is the custom locations thing, right? The custom locations are also now generally available, and custom locations are another piece of that overarching fundamental building block, which is Azure Arc-enabled Kubernetes. And custom locations, to simply put it, is just a mapping between the Arc-enabled Kubernetes cluster and exposing that as a location for deploying these extensions that we were talking about, as a result, those services that are using those extensions, right? So custom locations is really the mapping to the Kubernetes cluster and the namespace inside that Kubernetes cluster that will hold these resources that you are deploying as data services. So
Yeah, no, this is one of the cool thing, by the way. I love the custom location. I always say custom region, but it's custom location thing, because it allows you basically, for those who haven't looked at it yet, it's super cool. If you look at then Azure Arc-enabled data services and Azure Arc-enabled application services and so on, you can then go, for example, to the Azure portal. You don't need to use the Azure portal, by the way. You can also use the CLI or ARM templates. And then instead of selecting an Azure region, you just select your custom location, and so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. So Thomas, I know that we had more announcements, obviously, and there is one that is everyone are talking about, right? So let's just get this out the door. Let's just talk about the VMware stuff.
Yep. So we announced actually the Azure Arc-enabled vSphere, VMware vSphere. So this is some really cool stuff we are getting there. So when I talked with customers, right, when we showed Azure Arc-enabled servers before, for example, which we have now for years now, at least for 2 years, it allowed us to basically connect the guest VMs and connect, like even hosts in theory would connect, and we can do some management parts. But the one question I always got is like, hey, I have this virtualization environment. I also want to go and manage these VMs. I want to resize them. I want to stop them. I want to create new VMs. I want to do the whole life cycle management over the Azure control plane. And with the new announcement, and I'm going to show you that here in a quick print screen here. Let me quickly move this to the stream. You can actually now do that. So you connect your vSphere environment to the Azure control plane. And then what you can do is you can really do VM lifecycle management, as you can do, for example, for Azure VMware solutions hosted in Azure, right? You can do the same thing for your VMware environment running on premises in your own location or at your edge location, wherever you run your VMware infrastructure. And then you can go out and basically build your own your own images which you built, and basically go out and say, hey, I want to deploy this one like I would do with an Azure VM. And to be honest, one of the great things, of course, the portal is great, right? I love the portal. I always show features in the portal. But this enables now to let us use infrastructure as code. Like we can now build ARM templates or Bicep to actually go out and deploy our infrastructure stuff on-prem. How cool is that?
Yeah, I think that, for the viewers that don't know, I came from, I joined Microsoft 6 years ago from VMware. I was kind of, very involved in that community, and I was, really in the weeds of all the VMware stuff. And since then, I kind of a bit drifted away, organically, because I started doing other things. And when I started working on Azure Arc about 2 years ago, when I learned about the direction that we're taking, and back then VMware was still not a thing. But as we started to talk about this also internally, I was really excited about the the opportunity that we're going to present to not just the VMware community and the ecosystem, really like the entire IT community, because I think that Azure Arc enabled VMware vSphere is also being developed and deployed in a very sophisticated fashion via something that we call the resource bridge. And again, let's just be accurate here about this, right? This is not just for VMware. We're also doing that for Azure Stack HCI, right? So it's really about kind of bringing those on-premises infrastructure locations and bring those to Azure. And I think that the resource bridge notion and the fact that now you have an appliance that is running on your vSphere environment that basically suck in all the resources and bring those into the control plane, and then you can do all the lifecycle management that you're referring to. I think it's pretty cool. I think that there is so much potential in that area, specifically with Azure Arc enabled VMware vSphere, and I'm excited about what is it that is gonna come after that. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, one of the great things is also like, it's not just like when we speak, by the way, I just want to quickly add that the chat is also thinking that, by the way, Azure Arc enabled VMware vSphere is amazing. I see a lot of like good smileys there. People like really like that. One of the things I learned, like when we actually like in the last couple of weeks, is that we're not just like saying, hey, okay, you can do some sort of control. Like I said, like we can do the VM lifecycle management. But what you can also do is directly onboard, when you create a new VM, directly onboard that VM to Azure Arc enabled servers. Right. So when you have like Azure policy guest configuration in place, when you have security center in place, this VM or this VM you create then on VMware vSphere in your own data center is then automatically onboarded to that control plane as well, and it gets like all the policies assigned and the security center stuff. So that's
the last thing that I will say about this, Thomas, something interesting is that we're doing that also in a non-disruptive way, which is important to say, right? Because we're not telling you to change anything about your operations. We're just telling you, hey, deploy the appliance, deploy the resource bridge. It will take care of everything. But I think that the fact that now you have those VMware virtual machines in our control plane without us doing any manipulations to those VMware virtual machines, we're basically just talking to vCenter API, right? I mean, I'm very impressed by this one. So yeah.
Yep. No, again, and I think it's one of the big announcements. I know already, like from speaking with customers like months back, right? I know that there's a lot of demand for that as well. And I think what you also just mentioned, I think what is very important, we are not obviously just doing that for other hypervisors. We have this thing called Azure Stack HCI, which is our hyper-converged infrastructure solution. And we also enabling this for Azure Stack HCI. So when you want to have a full stack Microsoft solution, when you have like Microsoft, when Microsoft runs through your blood, right? When you really go with that, you have the Azure Stack HCI solution, which is, by the way, I still love like what we get out of performance of these things. Like before I joined Microsoft, I was like doing a lot of these projects were still called or still the Windows Server versions, right? It was just insane. And so we also have a couple of updates for this where we should probably talk about.
Yeah.
So let me quickly go and show this, what we're actually doing, right? Azure Stack HCI, again, and maybe you want to summarize Azure Stack HCI currently for me. Like what can we do? Like, or what was Azure Stack HCI initially there to do?
Yeah, so first of all, the first thing that we came up with was Azure Arc enabled servers with the context of Azure Stack HCI, right? Every time you have a virtual machine that gets deployed on Azure Stack HCI, and not just that virtual machine gets onboarded, but also the cluster itself gets onboarded, right? So you have this, full view of the infrastructure. So we started with that. Then we started to embedding AKS on Azure Stack HCI, which brings AKS to your own infrastructure. Which, again, I think it's very important. And we talked about Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes, and AKS is also going to be, like, in that context, it's going to be Arc enabled. So that's another important feature. And then you have the PaaS services, right? Because we said that Kubernetes is the fundamental building block. So you're going to get app services, functions, and all that. But now we have new things, Thomas.
Yep. So we obviously had very big announcements. And I think this is one of the advantages, delivering a HCI solution, for example, as a cloud service, right? It's not just like you mentioned. There are a couple of two things I always highlight as well. I mean, there's like the virtualization part, but then it's actually the billing you do over an Azure subscription. So it's actually cloud-based. You get it as a service. So there's no like, okay, I buy now this specific version, and then in 2 years I need to upgrade to the next version because I want to have all these cool features. No, you get it really as a service. And the next thing I really like about it, by the way, and also like I know a lot of customers like, it's doing it with Azure support. So you get actually like if there is something wrong, you call the Azure support hotline, right? It's not some like other whatever support. It's the Azure support hotline. And we have two big announcements. I think this is really, really big. The one I got lightened up when I heard about this. we offer Azure Virtual Desktop. So our VDI and session host solution, we only have like we had in Azure. We're going to enable this on Azure Stack HCI. So you can still use the Azure control plane to manage your VDI infrastructure and your multi-session hosts as you can do in Azure today, but then have the pools basically enabled on your local Azure Stack HCI. And we do some awesome magic there. For example, when a user now connects to this, he creates a RDP connection, right? And what usually happens like with the Azure Virtual Desktop solution, you would obviously connect to an Azure API and then to an Azure VM running in Azure, right? That is how it usually would work. Now, customers told us again for many, many reasons they want to have these solutions or these virtual machines, these session hosts basically run in their own location. These can be latency reasons or data sovereignty reasons and many, many others, right? Not reliable internet connectivity sometimes. That is also one. And so we added a feature called RDP short path. So in that case, you still connect through it, right? But then it realizes, hey, I have a direct connection locally to that Azure Virtual Desktop solution.
Pretty cool.
And absolutely. And so this is now in preview, so people can go and try it out today. They can start doing that. I have to say, like just as a quick quote, there's obviously, because it's very early, it's in the preview, that's why it's also in preview. There are some limitations included as well, but I spoke already to a couple of customers which were so much waiting for this to enable this as well. They're saying, well, we need to try this, right? I mean, these limitations at one point hopefully go away and we try it out. And I think one of the things which people are really also why you would use this like versus Windows Server 2022 as like with remote desktop services. One simple reason I can give you with that is that, for example, the Microsoft 360 apps, like what you would use in Azure Virtual Desktop, they're not supported on a RDS environment running 2022. With Windows Server 2019, there you can use it. That's a supported scenario. But if you want to have the latest and greatest, you need to go to Azure Virtual Desktop, either running in Azure or now with the preview on Azure Stack HCI.
So virtual desktops is something that I always, I don't know, for some reason I always kind of drifted from that. Even back in the days, I was not someone that was investing a lot of time on understanding VDI as a, not that I didn't understand what VDI is, but I just never took the time to really think about architectures of VDI's environment. And I think that this one, and again, it's managed services are just great. I mean, I just like to think about stuff, So,
No, I love it. And again, this is also obviously a couple of other things we needed to enable on Azure Stack HCI as well. And I will talk about, we'll have this in just a bit and we'll show also. But another big thing by the way, I mentioned already Windows Server, is we're going to enable some Azure benefits for Windows Server running on Azure Stack HCI. So, Lior, I'm sure you're obviously familiar with the Windows Server Azure edition we have, which gives you some additional capabilities such as auto manage, hot patching, which by the way is super exciting. It allows you to install security updates without a reboot, right? So that was one of the main complaints we had for many, many years. I mean, since I started working in IT, when you obviously needed to reboot your servers after patching for many, many times.
Right.
Now, I think it was like beginning of this year. It was like, well, it's already a couple of months ago. We announced hot patch for Windows Server Azure Edition running obviously in Azure.
Right. It's a very complex name.
I know, and especially because now you can run Windows Server Azure Edition, not just in Azure, but also on Azure Stack HCI.
Right.
Okay, I don't know how many times I now said Azure in one sentence, but that is what's going to happen. And so we get some awesome, cool benefits there as well. Hot patch is just one of them, right? So this is pretty cool. It also will bring billing solution. So instead of like you buy your Windows Server license like you did traditionally, you can now will be able to get these over your Azure subscription as well. So this is also some interesting part, especially if you just need it for a very short time, right? And it enables some interesting licensing scenarios as well.
Yeah, I think all these this space is just. I admit I need to know more about this space in terms of the virtual desktoping, these type of benefits that we're getting attached to that. I think it's a very interesting space. It's just I still didn't took the time to look at that. I think let's say hello to a few people that we're seeing on the chat. I see Hey Ku, I see Ahmad. Hey Ahmad. I see Lisa. Hey Lisa, how's it going? Joshua has actually a good question that he's bringing up, which is any updates coming to Azure Monitor and update management in the context of Azure Arc enabled servers. By the way, I'm very impressed. I still haven't seen anyone writing Arc with capitals, which is kind of impressive. But let me take Joshua questions for a second. So Joshua, Azure Arc enabled servers with Azure Monitor is currently generally available. You can go and install the OMS agent extension, deploy that. You're going to get Azure Monitor integration. That's out the box. Update management is an interesting one. We're actually going through few changes the way that we are designing update management. So you're going to see some new stuff coming in the next few weeks and months around update management. We're getting a lot of these questions, right, on update management and with the context of Azure Arc enabled servers, patch management, lifecycle, all that stuff. So I hope that people start seeing the direction that we're taking with this. Like we talked about it with VMware, we talked about it with HCI, AVD, all this stuff. So yeah, some cool things are coming with update management, which obviously we'll share once those will go live. So I hope that answer a bit the question. And what else do we have, Thomas?
Yeah, we've not giving it too much away, right? That's good. I love how you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying.
No, you're doing great. No, absolutely. So there's obviously a ton more stuff we are having, and I love the questions coming in. We will definitely have more looks at it. Also, thank you everyone for joining here again. One thing I want to also go in, it's not just obviously about like what we just enable through Azure, right? Also the operating system of Azure Stack HCI got a couple of new updates, which are really cool if you are managing the hypervisor itself, right? So for example, one of them, kernel soft reboot, which allows you to really reboot your hosts instead of like having a full reboot done. You can actually just do a soft reboot. Like what that means, it can be like 10 times faster to do that. We offer GPU support, so you can now get GPU support in clustered virtual machines. So that is pretty cool, especially for AI and machine learning scenarios.
Right.
And then one thing, I since you're not the virtualization guy, I think, do you know what like CPU compatibility means? And I'm sure like everyone here out there in the chat now or watching this video is like, oh my God, this will make me so happy. All the Hyper-V guys out there will be so happy about this one.
I guess that if you're familiar with the term EVC from the VMware space, right, which is enhanced vMotion compatibility. Yeah, I still got it.
Did I just say not a big virtualization guy? Like just a little bit of
sarcastic. I still got it.
There was a sarcastic undertone.
I still got it.
Awesome. No, absolutely, you're right. If we know like for example, we had this feature for CPU compatibility, and this allows basically when you say, hey, I have a mixed server environment, right? If you have new physical servers with newer CPUs, they have different capabilities, obviously, and those are passed through to the virtual machine. And if you then move that VM, as you said, like for live migration to a server which doesn't have these capabilities, you couldn't move that. So what you need to enable was the CPU compatibility mode. And what that did was basically took all the instructions to the lowest point in the cluster. And then you could move, but then you lose all the benefits of having that. And so with this, you can dynamically adjust that.
It's like you have a cluster that is built out of Ferraris, but they're telling you, hey, ride a bicycle. Which is a bit of a problem for some people, I guess.
Yeah, I love that. That's definitely a good one.
So
then we also have like some other stuff. I think very interesting fin provisioning for storage spaces, direct data volumes, which can be very helpful if you plan. It makes it easier if you manage the storage on these things. We have some additional networking stuff. We also have, by the way, a new wizard to set up the networking, and this now also does like, okay, hey, if there is a change to it which shouldn't be, it goes back to the original state, like kind of like a change control and drift correction there as well. And then obviously we get all the security benefits we now built into Windows Server 2022, like with Secure Core, which prevents you like from things like firmware attacks and stuff like that, which is now also built into the operating system of Azure Stack HCI. And by the way, just saying, this here, like this operating system is GA, right? This is not some sort of a preview. So if you have an Azure Stack HCI cluster, this will come over the air basically to you. And if you roll out a new cluster, you would basically do that already with this version.
There is one thing when I'm looking at all these features and capabilities, those new features and capabilities. The one thing that is standing out for me, which is the GPUs, because I think again, I'm taking that to the Azure Arc space for a second. If you're thinking about Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes as the fundamental building block for other services, right? We talked about app services, we talked about functions, we'll talk more about data services. I think that we can go to that next. But GPUs on Azure Stack HCI, now that you have Azure Arc enabled machine learning on top of AKS on Azure Stack HCI, these workloads, right, can take advantage of these GPUs. So I think that's really about connecting the dots when it comes to the use case, right? So it's not enough for us to just do Azure Arc enabled machine learning. That's great. I mean, that's important. But machine learning workloads, right, most of the time will take advantage or want to take advantage of GPUs in the context of AI and models and trainings and all that stuff. So that's something that is standing out for me in this set of new features and announcements.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, I cannot agree more with you on this. It's definitely a big one. But obviously, we talked now a bit about what the operating system capabilities are. Let's talk also a little bit about how we lighten up Azure Stack HCI with Azure, the Azure Arc management piece. And this is basically the overview we got to see, hey, what is in public preview, what is in private preview, and then also what the team thinks is working on. I love that we share this little roadmap here already with our customers, so they can actually go out and plan for this, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things, which is definitely the big one for me, big one is definitely the monitoring piece, right? You can now go out and use Azure Monitor to manage. You obviously use that before for the guest VMs. Now you can actually monitor your whole cluster, like your host cluster of Azure Stack HCI using the Azure Arc enabled connection. So you see suddenly lighting this feature up, right? And
that's why I said, Thomas, that's real hybrid, because that really means hybrid. Okay, let's just be real about that for a second. That really means hybrid. So,
it's lightening up. Like it makes your on-premises environment better using the cloud, right? It's like, hey, there's things I can do in the cloud, and I love this part. But I have reasons to run it on-prem. but why not combine these two? And again, as you said, this is the real hybrid
Right.
stuff there. So, by the way, Chris Black just said very true, Lior. I don't know exactly what you said, but there must be something you did.
Generally speaking, it's a right comment to everything that I'm saying. So, yes,
absolutely. Yeah. Okay. I give you that one. Then what we also see is like the interesting piece, which is in private preview, auto manage coming to that, right? So this is going to be interesting. I spoke a little bit. I did mention auto manage before for what we can do in Azure, but now this is also coming obviously to VMs running on Azure Stack HCI. And so for those, so Lior, for those of you, for those who were watching and not really familiar with auto manage, can you quickly say what it is?
Auto manage is basically, think of auto manage as a wrapper for governance. The way I like to think about auto manage is a set of primitives that are being bundled for you against your servers. And what we're doing with auto manage is we are enforcing your governance baselines on top of these servers in an automated fashion, right? So you won't have to go and worry about the baseline for security or the baseline for compliance and governance in your organization. So that's where auto manage comes into place. It's really about remediation and reporting back on the status of your environment, and give Azure the instructions in a declarative fashion on what to do when something goes wrong, or what to do when something is out of whack. That's really what auto manage in one sentence is all about. So yeah.
So Azure fixes it if something is out of whack, if I understand.
Out of whack. That's that should go on a t-shirt. Auto manage, your out of whack fixer or something. I should offer that to the team. So yeah.
Nice. Yeah, we put that somewhere in the store. No, but it's actually great, right? I mean, I show, what I realized is I show a lot of people the setup of all this Azure management services, right? You mentioned them, like update management, monitoring, all that stuff, right? And it can sometimes be a little bit confusing for people who haven't really worked a lot with Azure yet, because you also need to think about what is the correct setup? What do I do, right? How do I configure it the right way? And we have that knowledge, and we put it into the cloud adoption framework, which is like proven guidance. We actually worked with the engineering teams, customers, partners, field teams together to give this Azure proven guidance. And this explains you, okay, when do I use what? How do I configure, for example, these management services? And obviously much, much more than that. But now with auto manage, we just take that knowledge and just apply it. I did a demo once. Someone wanted me to do a demo, a 1 hour demo on Azure Auto Manage, and I was like, well, it takes me 10 seconds to go through this because it's so easy to do, right? And now, think about it, for all the server management you need to do. Having that, okay, it's great for Azure VMs. We already have that there, but now having that also for my on-prem VMs on Azure Stack HCI, how cool is that?
Yeah. And I like the box that was on the far right, and stay tuned for others, because you don't know who are the others. I mean, you're waiting on them. You don't know who they are. It's kind of funny, funny box, but yeah.
Yeah. I also by the way, this one. This is pretty cool. I did not know until I actually read about this stuff a little bit more, because this was not one of the big super big announcements we had. There is the PowerShell one, and I know that Heiko in the chat is super excited about this one. It actually allows us, it's like a run command v2 extension, which basically allows us to run a command or a script against the nodes, right? And so that is a pretty cool thing if you need to manage these nodes, instead of, again, what you said, the same thing as the cluster connect thing. For the Kubernetes part, you can do that with the Azure Stack host operating systems. Well, let's say they are planning it to enable you to do that. It's not there yet, as you can see on the slide, but I think that is pretty cool. And then you can really get okay, hey, I need to do something which is not enabled by the control plane itself, like in the UI or anywhere.
Yeah.
But I need to run a script. I need to do something. I need to install a third-party agent, whatnot.
It gives me a lot of, I have to say that this specific one gives me a lot of ideas to, again, no shameless plugs, but to the Jumpstart project. It gives me like ideas on the potential of using this stuff as we are developing more and more things. But anyway, just wanted to highlight that and do a shameless plug. So yeah,
I was like, it took you a long time.
It took me like 38 minutes to say Jumpstart. I mean, that's ridiculous. So Jumpstart. Yes.
Yeah. No, we will definitely. By the way, for everyone who doesn't know what the Jumpstart is, and again, Lior will be super upset. Don't tell him you don't know what the Jumpstart is. We will cover this at the end. He will talk a little bit about the Jumpstart, because this will then show you how you can actually go out and try a lot, or basically almost all of these new hybrid capabilities very easily in Azure or wherever you have it running, right? So
yeah.
That's some cool stuff.
What else? Let's switch gears. What else do we have? Like, we had tons of announcements. Let's talk about more stuff. What else do we have?
Yep. So obviously we had way more. One of the big ones I personally like so much, and I know you do too, is the stuff about the Azure Arc enabled data services. And maybe again, this is something sometimes I tell these people and they don't even know what it is, and they suddenly go, "Whoa, I did not know that we can do this." And so, can you give a little bit of a overview on that?
Yeah, Azure Arc enabled data services is really about bringing our data services to outside of Azure, on top of your Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes cluster, right? I talked about the notion of this being the fundamental building block. So today you are able to deploy SQL managed instance and also PostgreSQL hyperscale on top of Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes cluster. And let's be accurate about this, or let's emphasize something here. This is a managed service. This is not just us deploying something from a marketplace and that's it. It floats into space. That's not how it works. This is really connected to our APIs. So, and this is really the big announcement around Azure Arc enabled data services, which is the general availability for directly connected mode. So let's talk about it for a second. In Azure Arc enabled data services, you have two types of ways for you to connect the environment into Azure. You have directly connected mode and you have indirect connected mode. Indirect means that you are kind of living in a bit of an isolation, right? So you can deploy the services, but these services are not really reporting back in an automated software API-based fashion, right? So they kind of live in a bit of an isolation there, which is, for some customers, for some use cases, I understand. But if you really want to take advantage of the full breadth of Azure Arc enabled data services, this is where Directly Connect comes into place. So again, Azure Arc is really about connecting the control plane or extending the control plane. And directly connected mode means that the SQL managed instance that you are deploying, the PostgreSQL hyperscale that you are deploying, are being part of the API, right? They are first-class citizens inside the API. And that means that, do we have good questions? Like I'm seeing a bunch of stuff. Anyway, I'll come back to that. So directly connected mode means that these services are living inside our APIs. Now, this really means that all your billing, provisioning, scaling, reporting back, monitoring, and all these goodies and bells and whistles are available out of the box when you're deploying data services in directly connected mode, right? So when you go by and want to deploy these type of services, which is SQL managed instance or Postgres, the data controller, which is the brain, right? How I like to call it. I told this to Scott, I think the other day, right? The brain of the octopus. The data controller really decide based on what you're telling him on how to manage those data services. So if you're deploying that in a directly connected mode, that means that now you those services are first-class citizens. And Danaje, or how we like to call him internally, DJ Data, that's the name that I came up for Danaje. He wrote a great blog post that really goes and explain all this stuff into details. And yeah, by at the end of the show, we're also going to share some next steps on how you can how you can get going, but you have the architecture and everything that is between. So yeah, go check it out. I think that this is an important one. Data is really where things are becoming even more real, right? Everything is driven by data. We're not doing Azure Arc-enabled Kubernetes for the notion of just doing Azure Arc-enabled Kubernetes. We're doing that in order to enable data services, machine learning, app services, the things that really brings value to the business. So that's where it comes into play. So that's why I love directly connected mode. I think it's easier. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, and especially I like how you summarized it at the, at the end, like where you said, like, hey, we're not just doing Azure Arc-enabled Kubernetes just for fun, right? It's actually lightening up like other solutions out there now, and with like enabling us to deploy these Azure services outside of Azure. Now it was funny. So I did a video with Travis Wright, who's like leading data. This guy exactly, and he is basically like he said, like, look. If like we know that customers, for example, love Azure SQL, right? But there are reasons they cannot use it in Azure. Yep. And so if a customer cannot use it in Azure, we bring the Azure SQL service to them, right? So to their location, wherever they need them. And I think that is true now, not just for obviously for our Azure Arc-enabled data services and Azure SQL, but also a wide variety of other services, which are currently like the application services, which are currently in preview to do that. But you can see where we're going with this. And I had a great conversation with kind of like a couple of cloud architects outside of Microsoft. They were doing that for different companies. And what they came up with is like, hey, Thomas, look, the problem we are actually having is they ask us to like do cloud native application architectures, right? But at the same time, they want them to run in a multi-cloud or hybrid environment. And unfortunately, you can't really like use all these PaaS services like Azure SQL and app services. Like you cannot use them like in GCP or AWS, or you cannot use them on-prem. And then now we have Azure Arc-enabled services, which is great. And now we can actually do this, right? So if you're building a new application architecture, you can still take advantage of the Azure PaaS services, even if the application is not running in Azure. Right. So that for me is like
I had a conversation. So we have a couple of PMs from our product. We had a conversation around hybrid application development patterns. It sounds fancy, but let's talk about it for a second. It's really about how you're thinking about developing an application in a hybrid space, right? Because having the conversation on, let's do cloud native application development, distributed systems, microservices, all that jazz, and talk about it in the context of Azure, this is something that is becoming more and more mature, obviously, and it's also becoming more and more mainstream, right? That conversation, that type of conversations, right? Especially in the notion of Kubernetes becoming more and more the de facto standard for companies that wants to modernize for these type of architectures. But hybrid application development patterns are very unique, because now you also can take under consideration, like you mentioned, those services that are managed services but outside of Azure. So if you're thinking about an application with a front end, a middle tier, and a back end, so you can think about Azure Arc-enabled web applications, right, with app services. You can think about functions somewhere in between. You can think about Azure Arc-enabled SQL managed instance in the context of backend mechanism, and also Azure Arc-enabled machine learning for your AI training and models and all that stuff, right? So it's really becoming more and more real. That's what I want to say. These are hybrid patterns around application development. So, yeah. What else do we have?
No, absolutely. I just want to quickly bring this up. I think this is a very important part. It's not just a quick discussion we should have there, because again, we always tell like, hey, we need to go to these higher level services, right? And this is really the scenario which enables it. Absolutely right. I think one of the last things we have on the list, I'm not sure if it's the only one. There's definitely more, but one of the lists I remember is like the security stuff. I think you already mentioned the Defender piece. Is that correct? Did we already cover that?
So first of all, I to be completely honest, I still haven't caught up with all the name changes that are going on, but there is something that is worth sharing here. So let's talk about that. we talked about the extension piece, right? We talked about the fact that Azure Arc-enabled Kubernetes has this notion of extensions. This is how we are deploying services and features. Azure Defender is another one of those extensions. And actually, you know what? Let me share something here. I have something to share. Let's just do that. Let's just do that on the fly. Let's just do that on the fly. All right. So this is my Azure portal, right? And this is an Azure Arc-enabled Kubernetes cluster. And this is just one of my clusters that I'm developing against. And you can see here that we have these extensions, right? And let me just zoom in, and also I can go fancy, do things like that, right? But if you look at the Azure Defender extension, if you look at the data services, the Azure Monitor Containers extension, I think that this is becoming, I want to connect the dots here. Now, the Defender piece is interesting because now what you can do is you can connect that cluster also to be able to manage your security posture, okay, with, again, a native service that is an Azure service, right? Defender. And then you have the context, or you have the connectivity to Azure Security Center, which, right, changed its name to Microsoft Cloud Defender, I think it was. I don't remember, so apologies. But it changed its name, and now this trifecta of Azure Defender, Security Center, Sentinel, which is another big thing, this trifecta of services is making your cluster now a target for having this nice warm blanket of security services and features. So that's very important. Something to share maybe with the audience, some things that we are also working on. I know that we're talking about the Ignite announcements, but we're also working on Defender for servers, right? So the extension model is also something that Azure Arc-enabled servers is using. So think about a situation where you have Azure Arc-enabled server, and now you can go and install the Defender extension against that server. And from that point, that server is now being protected by Defender. So that's cool. And this is something that we're coming with.
Yep. And I know in effect that this is something a lot of customers, even so, like just for that, they're already considering Azure Arc, right? This is like for them. Okay, we want this, and we're going to go for that. I also quickly, I don't want to interrupt. You go ahead in just a bit. I just published a poll, so you can actually go out and, like, in the chat window, you can actually vote. I gave you 4 options because that's the amount of options.
Am I allowed to vote? Am I allowed to vote?
You can try, but I'm not. I don't even know which one you would select. I mean, it's a hard poll. So you can vote. What is the biggest announcement for you at this Microsoft Ignite when it comes to hybrid? So we have Azure Arc Kubernetes in the choice. We have Azure Stack HCI together with Azure Virtual Desktop. We have Azure Arc enabled vSphere, and we have Azure Arc enabled data services. So far, like 100% voted for Azure Arc enabled vSphere. So let's see what, like, if you're on this stream, please vote and let me know how it's going. Yeah,
would be nice to know.
By the way, also Andrew called Travis a legend. I think I'm not sure if we want to show Travis that.
let's not. It's he's already got the big title. We don't need to call him a legend. Let's not do that. But yeah, I love Travis.
Awesome.
So what, maybe let's just share with the audience, like, how do you get started? What should you look for, right? What else, Thomas? Do we want to cover anything else?
Yep. No, before, the only thing I want to cover again, like, what I would be interesting, and you can write it in the chat if you're following this. What I would be interesting, we talked now about Azure Arc enabled services. So, for example, data services, application services. Mm-hmm. What Azure service would you like to see to be Arc enabled and to come outside of Azure, like be available on premises or at other cloud providers? What is missing, right? I mentioned a couple of them. If you don't know if they're available or not, just don't care about that. Just I want to know, and I think sure Lior also wants to know, what are the services you're waiting for, and what would you like to see there to actually be able to deploy in your own data center?
It's a good question. We got in the previous Ignite session that I did, and we also have another one today. We got some good good comments on some of this stuff. So I'm not going to share that because I don't want to influence the audience here. But definitely a lot of potential in this space. Let's just say that, a lot of potential. So
awesome.
Pretty cool.
Okay, perfect. Then let's see where we actually want to go. I mean, it's now we could probably still talk way more about these things here, but let's talk a little bit about what if the people want to learn more about hybrid cloud and multi-cloud adoption. And so I want to quickly share that slide here. We mentioned the Azure Cloud Adoption Framework. And probably, Lior, you want to tell a little bit more about this, what we actually have there for hybrid and multi-cloud.
Yeah. So currently what we have in the Cloud Adoption Framework for hybrid is a set of guidance or principles around how you go by and thinking about the hybrid infrastructure. But as we grew and became more mature with Azure Arc and Azure Stack HCI, the time has come for us to start actually taking Azure Arc and be more specific and descriptive about how you want to think about Azure Arc in the context of Cloud Adoption Framework and in the context of enterprise scale landing zones and what to do around that. So I'm happy to share that we are actually working on that with Azure Arc enabled servers enterprise scale that is target to go GA pretty soon. In this set of documentations, what we will share is the critical design areas. We're going to come up with a new approach for how to sandbox a lot of this stuff, how to get going. So pretty exciting stuff that are coming. And following to that, we're also going to start developing the Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes and data services enterprise scale documentation. So pretty cool stuff. I mean, I'm pretty excited about this, especially because this is a work stream that I'm working very closely on. So I think pretty cool stuff.
No, awesome. And again, I also quickly, before I go, by the way, I have one slide especially for you, Lior, in just a bit. But before we actually go to that one, I also quickly want to share something. Like we have these Azure Arc learning paths on Microsoft Learn, right? So there's also some on Azure Stack HCI, and I put a link into the chat here, so you can just go to a blog post where we have a little bit of a summary what's happening to Azure Arc at Microsoft Ignite, written by Guillermo. Good friend of us. So if he at one point watches this, you can thank us later. But there you have a like links to the different Microsoft learning paths, right? And if you're not familiar with Microsoft Learn, it's a free learning platform. We give you sandbox environments. We provide you with videos. We provide you with texts and all that good stuff. And you can actually learn about these different technologies. And there are a couple of other interesting links as well. And so I promised you, Lior, you can obviously also talk a little bit about the Azure Arc Jumpstart project.
Yeah, we talked about it many times, but just for those of you that are following the space and are not familiar with the Jumpstart project and been living under a rock, it's really a project that is designed to really just make you awesome. Really, just for you to start and get going with Azure Arc and with these hybrid technologies. And it's based on multiple scenarios that we have currently, more than 90 scenarios at this point. And also we have another solution that we built as part of the Jumpstart, which is called ArcBox. And ArcBox is a fully sandbox environment with everything that is Azure Arc. We're also going to come up with new stuff around ArcBox in the next few weeks. So watch out for that space. Pretty interesting stuff that we're working on. So really, AKAMS Azure Arc Jumpstart to get started. Obviously, you have docs, you have learning Microsoft Learn models. So I think, Thomas, been working with Microsoft, like I said, for a few years now. I think the Azure Arc and the hybrid workstream is probably the one with the most amount of content that is out there, like technical content, like good old technical content that enables people. So that's why I love it so much. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're absolutely right. And again, big shout out again to the Azure Arc Jumpstart project. It's really like valuable if you want to try this out really, really quickly. It enables you to spin up these scenarios. It's super awesome. I think we're also coming slowly to an end just because of everyone's time, right? And you probably want to watch some other Microsoft Ignite session. Again, appreciate everyone who joined, all the great comments we have. If you are still interested in learning more, and if you didn't get your questions answered, or you want to bring in some other questions, feel free to connect with Lior and me on these topics. By the way, if you like this content, give it a like and also subscribe to the channel. Then we will keep you up to date. By the way, that's I think what every YouTuber all the time says, right? This is like when it really gets to the end. Yeah.
Right.
I done that well. We have a training for that.
I should also take that training. I mean, for the lightning show. But yes, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. No, great content. Again, also follow obviously the Azure Arc Jumpstart project and Lior as well. It was great talking to you.
Yeah, thanks
today.
That was awesome. Yeah,
always
always fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you're now still crazy busy. Ignite is still running. So thank you to everyone again for joining. And I hope that you have a great day.
Yeah. Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining.